You've been hearing a lot about the Delta variant. Do the vaccines work with the Delta variant? We're going to find out today. Hello, everyone. Dr. Chris Martinson here with episode 13 of our our coverage of all things in the world, especially relating to things around the coronavirus. So we've got a really important episode today. I've had a lot of questions about the vaccine, of course, and about does it work, does it not work, which one should I get, et cetera, and so forth. Today we've got some really important information because you've probably been hearing all about the Delta variant. What is that thing? But there's certainly a lot of concern about that. I'm going to go now to my slides. We'll check this out because we've got, look at this. It's like, oh no, the Delta variant cometh. Here, the WHO urges fully vaccinated people to continue to wear masks and socially distance and do all of those things, including maybe even go into lockdowns because of the concern around the Delta variant. As well here, we see nature.com. Nature, of course, that August erstwhile Science magazine says Delta coronavirus variant, scientists brace for impact. Pretty ominous sounding, right? Indeed it is. Carry on here. Look at this. CNN Health saying the Delta variant will cause very dense outbreaks in these 5 states. Expert says, guess which expert? All of our favorite one, right? Same one. Here's a hint. He serves on the Pfizer board. So, of course, we want to accelerate getting the Pfizer vaccine, I assume, would be the answer for this same expert. So that all sounds really worrying, but is it? So I want to unpack the data a little bit because the data we should let the data tell the story. The headlines are doing a bad job at this. All right. So what do we got here? So Wall Street Journal very recently said that the Delta variant outbreak in Israel infects some vaccinated adults. That sounds bad, potentially. So I'm going to get my draw tool up here, pull this up. It says here about half of adults infected in an outbreak of the Delta variant of COVID-19 in Israel were fully inoculated with the Pfizer Incorporated vaccine, prompting the government to reimpose an indoor mask requirement and other measures to contain the highly transmissible strain. So it's actually true that the Delta variant is a very highly transmissible strain. Remember, we had that original variant we talked about over a year ago, well over a year ago now, the so-called D614G, conferred about 40% extra transmissibility, but no real extra lethality, which was the good news. Remember, a mutation that causes a variant and can do a couple of things. 2 things we have to keep track of. 1, does that mutation make it more transmissible or less? Well, guess what? The mutation that makes it more transmissible is going to win that battle because it has evolutionary fitness or advantage in that story. So obviously, if you had 2 mutations occur in your body, the one that's more transmissible has a better chance of jumping to the next person and a better chance of jumping from there on. The second thing we would want to track is, well, it's more transmissible. Is it more deadly? Does it have a worse medical outcome? Things like that. So here, everything I've seen about the Delta virus so far is it has that D614G mutation and another one, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And together, it's way more transmissive than the other variants out there. But I think the data so far, and see if you agree with me, says less deadly too. So that's a good thing. That's the kind of mutation set you want. More transmissible, gets everywhere quicker, but less deadly. All right, so right here they're finding Israeli health officials suggest about 90% of new infections were likely caused by the Delta variant. So this all sounds pretty bad, right? I mean, oh my gosh, this fully inoculated people are getting this Delta variant, 90% of new infections. Hey, you know what we like to do here on this channel? We like to go right to the data. So yeah, I don't like words like this, 90%. 90% of what? More infectious. What? Compared to what? So let's go to the data. Here's some data. Practically no new cases in Israel. See that little blip right at the end right there? That little blip way out there? That's what they're talking about when they say, oh my gosh, there's this huge increase in cases, but it's a huge increase from practically 0. So I guess on a percentage basis is pretty bad. But overall, I'm going to suggest that Israel's pretty much at almost the same case count they had of coronavirus before this pandemic even started. See this way back here? Similar number. Almost indistinguishable from 0. But, again, cases are one thing, deaths are quite another. So what happens there when we look at those? Here are deaths in Israel, again, flatlined. practically zero. So I would invite you to look beyond the headlines that say, oh my gosh, this Delta variant, it's really terrible, 90% increase in cases, we're going to have to shut everything back down again. I'm having a hard time justifying that based on this data I see over here, because there really are almost no cases and almost no deaths. That's good news, right? That's great news. Remember, correlation isn't causation. So I would love to believe that the cause of this full decline in cases and deaths is the vaccines, and it could be. Israel's a highly vaccinated country, one of the more highly vaccinated in the world. But we also know that the coronavirus comes and goes with seasons. So was this, is it seasonality? Is it the vaccine, or is it both? I bet probably we got a little bit of a both running here. Now, in the UK, they noted here that this is kind of a very interesting chart I found here. I found it interesting, at least. When you look at the number of cases over time here, and we look at all these different variants. So each one of these different lines down here is a different variant. And these variants in days post detection, this is their prevalence out in the population out there. So they tend to, come out and become more prevalent, but flatline. But this is the Delta variant. It really is a lot more transmissive. And again, I'm pretty sure I know the reason why. And we're going to get to that in just a second. So the UK is looking at all this stuff. They also noted as well that a third of all confirmed Delta variant patients who needed emergency care had received at least one vaccine dose. And in fact, when you look at the deaths down here, 23 unvaccinated, 19 deaths in vaccinated, fully vaccinated people, kind of the same number. Now you have to get into a more complicated argument and discussion around what percentage of the population is vaccinated versus not. So you can't really compare 23 to 19. You could if it was exactly 50% of the population not vaccinated, 50% was. And they had the same comorbidities and the same age structure. Neither of those things are true. When a country goes into a vaccination schedule, they typically go for the older people first. And as we know, for every 6 to 7 years of age, there's about a doubling of the overall risk of dying. So can't really compare apples to apples here, but for sure we can notice that there are some breakthrough cases happening. And again, remember, we had that video that came out just very recently with Dr. Geert Vanden Bossche, who talked about the fact that we do see cases in fully vaccinated people maybe is contributing to that laboratory environment within human bodies to create new variants like the Delta variant. I have no evidence to suggest the Delta variant came out because of any vaccination program. It's sometimes colloquially called the Indian variant. It came out of India. India didn't have a lot and still doesn't have, percentage-wise, a very large vaccination population at this point in time. So I don't think it had anything to do with it. But now the Delta variant is running around in relatively heavily vaccinated populations. So we're going to test Dr. Vanden Bosche's theory out in real time. That's what we're looking at here. But you still see these scary, scary headlines. Delta variant cases doubling every 4.5 days in England. That sounds bad, right? So what do? We go to the data. Indeed, we see that cases are climbing pretty quickly here in the UK, right here. Those are cases. Now, remember, I don't like the word cases. These are detected infections. A case ought to be, used to be somebody who has both a detected infection and is seeking medical care. That's a case, like you would consider a case in a hospital. A caseworker usually works on somebody who has a case, right? They actually mean detected infections are on the rise. So let's just use this word cases. Bad use of the word. But that's what everybody's saying, so I got to use it too. But when we look at these cases and we look at deaths in the UK, again, it's flatlined out, practically indistinguishable from zero. That's where you'd see numbers like those 23s and the 19s we just looked at. Now, I'll admit, it's possible that we might see a rise in deaths because there's a lag. We all know that too. So when we see a rise in cases, we would expect 3 weeks later or so, we would start to see a rise in deaths. So it's possible when we come back to this data in a few weeks, we'll see this line tick up again. But even if it doubles and doubles again, it's still going to be a fraction of what it was back here in the bad old days. This is the second wave. That was awful in the UK there. So, hey, I'm cautiously optimistic that this Delta variant is definitely more transmissive. That's why we see rises in cases. I also think it's less deadly. We don't have good data yet, but in places where the Delta variant has been endemic for numbers of weeks, I haven't seen corresponding big spikes in deaths yet. Remember, if the data changes, I'll change my mind. That's just what I see so far currently right here. So I'll go out on a limb on that. More transmissive for sure, and here's why. You want to know why it's more transmissive? Let's go all the way back. We're going to have to start all the way back when this is actually from a May 2020 episode where I was comparing the SARS-CoV-2 genomic structure, in this case the amino acid structure, against all these other things out there, including classic SARS-CoV on the top, the pangolins. Remember the pangolins? John Stewart just talked about the pangolins. And what I noted back then that was really weird is that the receptor binding domain, that spot that actually binds on the spike protein, is responsible for docking with the ACE2 receptor. That part had 100% homology is the scientific word, 100% sequence identity. It was 100% identical to a pangolin receptor binding domain. And this is just showing, I've blacked out everything that's in black shows where there's a difference. Everything where it's not blacked out shows where it's identical. And there's a lot of identity between SARS-CoV-2 and a pangolin, which means it probably had some backbone, possibly this RATG13 backbone, which comes from a bat, and the pangolin. How did the bat and the pangolin get together? Because, by the way, interesting fact, SARS-CoV-2 can't back infect a bat. So how did it come out of a bat into a pangolin and then to a human with super high affinity? You know what I think? It's because somebody added this polybasic furin cleavage site. That got added in a lab. And this is where the story gets super interesting and hopefully not dark. I don't think it will because, again, I think this Delta variant is more transmissive, but less deadly. So the new Delta variant has a mutation called P681R. The way you decode that, the P is the original amino acid. P stands for proline in this story. 681 is the number of, if we had numbered all these amino acids in this virus from 1 to however many there are in this thing, we would find that at position 681, there's a proline. But that got changed to an R, which is an arginine in this story. So here it is. This is the Delta P681R. That jumped out at me when I first heard that number because I have a memory for things like this. This is the 680 position. What's in that 681 position? It's that P, which is the P in PRRA. That's the original sequence that gave that polybasic furin cleavage site that gives this virus. If it didn't have this, it would be way less good at being a virus for humans. Because what happens in that PRRA sequence, that's where a protease comes and clips it, causes a conformation change in the S protein. That allows it to enter the cell. So you would hypothesize that anything that allows that furin cleavage site to operate better, more completely, faster, would actually increase transmissibility of this virus. Why? Because it can get into a cell easier, and that means it can replicate inside the cell and get back outside of there again. Now remember, all of these vaccines just create antibodies, and then these antibodies go on and they can attack these viruses and bind onto them and hopefully neutralize them, but that's all outside of the cell. If these virus particles are wandering around inside a body and they can dock to the ACE2 and then get clipped really efficiently and get inside, before those antibodies had a chance to neutralize them, you would hypothesize that that mutation would then make this virus better at getting into a cell, and then it can replicate, and therefore it could possibly get out of the cell and transmit to another human faster, better, cheaper. That, I think, is what's happening. What we're facing with the Delta variant, in my mind, is in fact a consequence of the fact that somebody monkeyed around, inserted that particular sequence in a lab, got away from the lab somehow, and now we had a mutation in there. That's something I've been watching for. I've been worried about it for a long time. So with that additional R, we now have an RRRA. Those two R's in the first place create that's the polybasic because the arginines are basic. Polybasic, two R's. Well, now it's really polybasic because we have three R's in a row. Hypothesis time. That just makes it easier for that protease to find that sequence and clip and do what it does, which is help the virus inadvertently do what the virus wants to do, which is come into the cell faster, and so it can replicate and help complete its life cycle, if viruses even have life cycles. So that's the Delta variant. That's what that is. So now as we look around, though, you're going to hear a lot about this Delta variant. You're going to hear, I think we're looking at marketing here. And so let me unpack this a little bit. This Sinovac vaccine is actually, China's administered 1 billion doses within their own country. It's all over the world. It's been delivered heavily, especially to poorer countries, because it's a little bit cheaper and all that. And it says here, COVID-19 cases rise in countries using the Chinese vaccines Sounds racist. I thought we weren't allowed to say stuff like that. But when it comes to vaccines, maybe we can because they're competitors, I guess, to the preferred ones. So here we see in this article, they say Chile and Bahrain and Mongolia and the Seychelles, who have all used Chinese shots, are among the worst hit by COVID-19 recently. Sounds bad, right? Yeah, look at this one. Countries using Chinese COVID shots to achieve high vaccination rates now see surge in cases. This is just updated recently on June 23rd. In Seychelles, Chile, Bahrain, Mongolia, about 50 to 68% of the populations have been fully inoculated with the Chinese vaccines, outpacing the United States. However, they are also among the top 10 countries with the worst COVID-19 outbreaks. Sounds bad, right? Well, you know what we do. I hate words like surge and bad. Let's go to the data and see what we can find in the data, and then maybe you'll agree with me that these look like hit pieces, at least in part. Maybe. But what's the data say? First up, Seychelles, looking real bad, or are they? This is daily new cases in the Seychelles. I've read all the headlines. I'm sure you have. Very, very breathless. Like, this is bad. The 3-day moving average is 165? Remember, we were reading like 50,000 cases a day, 100,000, 250,000 cases per day in the United States. This is 165. So that's context one. Context two is looking at, jumped too far there. Looking here now at daily new deaths in the Seychelles. The 3-day moving average is at 1. Yep, 1, singular. So yes, we're seeing an increase in cases, and deaths, no question about it. That's definitely an increase. But look at the axis. Let's keep this in. Let's keep this all in context. That's a 4. That's a 2. But their 3-day moving averages are seeing an average of 1 death per day now. Admittedly, they were at 0 before. So is that worrisome? Potentially, but not as worrisome yet as those breathless headlines saying these. Remember what they were saying here. The countries. And bring that back up. Yeah, the country's top 10 countries with the worst COVID-19 outbreaks. And this is what they're talking about here. Worst. So make of that what you will. Let's move on. Chile, maybe a slightly more complex story. Again, they were one of the countries facing the worst outbreaks because they've been using the Chinese vaccines. These daily new cases here are being measured in the thousands. So this is 2,500 here at this mark, and this is 5,000 at this mark. So yeah, but they're also off of their highs recently. They had a double top here, and this was their worst outbreak back here. Well, it's kind of tied for these other ones. So yep, they're having a pretty bad outbreak in cases, I guess, but it's also on the way down. And how about deaths? Here it's a little bit more complicated. Daily new deaths in Chile are at 157 here a couple days back. You can definitely see a rise in the cases up through this period. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag there. So I clearly could say that there's a good chance that whatever Chile is doing isn't really working as well as it could. But as you know, I happen to think there's another way for this all to work out that involves a combination of vaccines and other things that people in countries could be doing. So just as a quick reminder, it really matters about the types of vaccines that we're talking about here. There are 3 big main approaches to making a vaccine. The first is that you're using the whole virus or bacterium, if it's a bacterial-based thing. The second is you're just using parts of that virus or bacterium, just the components of it. And the third is you're just going to use the genetic material here. So those are the 3 big ways to go about it. And this matters a little bit because the Sinovac is Coronavac, as they call it, known as the Sinovac, which they're saying is leading to a big outbreak here. It's an inactivated form of the virus, and that's pretty interesting. And so the question here now is this just a bad form of the inactivated virus, or is it a good form? Because a lot of times we've had a lot of success. We humans have had a lot of success with inactivated viral vaccines. It's why one of the big 3 types. It's worked pretty well in other contexts. Maybe this wasn't the right choice. Maybe there's a better one out of that. But the cool thing about the Sinovac is that it doesn't need to be frozen. You can just keep it like a regular influenza vaccine at like 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. It's like around 40 degrees or so, and it's fine. That's very different from the mRNA vaccines, which really, you got to treat them super special. So that's part of the reason that this was really selected by a lot of countries. And as well, originally it was found to be pretty effective, 65% effective against symptomatic COVID-19, 87% against hospitalization, 90% against ICU admission, and that's what was found in trials. I'm not seeing anything all that different in the Seychelles Islands at this point that would say that it's not working. But maybe we have to look at this after the Delta variant's been there just a little bit longer, and we can go through that a bit. I do think that there are other vaccine approaches out there that are kind of interesting. So when we look at Sinovac, when you take the whole microbe approach, they are using this inactivated virus. There's the live attenuated vaccine. I think there's a couple of those coming along. And then there's this viral vector vaccine, a couple of those out there as well. I believe the J&J and AstraZeneca are both on the viral vector. So there's some other cool ones. Point being, there's a lot of new vaccine developments coming out. It's kind of why I wish we hadn't sort of rushed with the first ones to get out of the gate, almost exclusively really pushing a lot of marketing effort to just a couple of those, in particular the mRNA vaccines. Kind of fun, possibly sexy, might work, but we're seeing a lot of... we're learning more about those. And so there are other viable platforms out there. And there's a couple coming along that I'm actually pretty intrigued by that I think really look like possibly they're going to be a lot better. Now, again, all of this is a concern because of what we talked about in this particular episode here, which you can find on our channel. This whole idea of immune escape, remember, it's a thing, meaning the viruses that are out there, they're looking to escape from whatever the immune response of the hosts are. And when we focus just down around putting the spike protein back in people and just get mostly, for the most part, really focusing on just getting antibodies against the spike protein, it gives a perfect environment, potentially, so goes the theory, which needs to be discussed openly without censorship. The theory goes that provides a place for the vaccine and the virus to come together and duke it out. So the vaccine hopefully wins against the virus, but if it's leaky virus, if it doesn't fully sterilize, it just creates actually a greater opportunity for the virus itself to practice this escape and evasion techniques. That's the theory, worth considering. I'd invite you to watch that if you haven't seen it. However, correlation isn't causation. Well, with the vaccines, that's not true. They say, look, we gave vaccines, the cases dropped. Must be that. With other things like Dwizabin 1 and 2, you have a much higher standard you have to jump over, and they're very, the opposition's very clear to point out correlations, not causation, but something in India, something is being done right. So look at these daily new cases just came crashing down here. So something's happening there. Is it weather? Is it something? We don't know. Look at daily new deaths in India. Had a bad run at it. These were all the headlines. You read them. They were breathless. There were, people dying in the streets. Funeral pyres just clouding the skies. But then something happened. So clearly something's being done right here in India. Really cool widget you can look at on the New York Times. I got the link down here, and you hover over each of these countries, and you can find out, well, how many people have been vaccinated. And they've had so far 23 administered vaccines per 100 people. But remember, that doesn't mean 23 out of 100 people are fully vaccinated, because many of these vaccines require 2 shots. And then you would be considered fully vaccinated. But even still, even if this had been 23 fully vaccinated out of 100 in India, that's not near enough to account for these dramatic fall-offs in deaths, because you're nowhere close to herd immunity at that point in time. You're nowhere close to having enough of the population be immunized in order to cause that kind of a drop-off. So it must be something else. Must be something else. I don't know what it could possibly be. I'm really out of ideas here. I'm thinking about all the different things it could be, and I don't know. I'm just fresh out of ideas. If anybody has any ideas, just let me know. I just don't. Must be something. Hard to say. Could be. But I don't know. I'll leave that for the experts at the medical information crew to sort of unravel that one, because I'm out of ideas. Don't know. All right, that's what I have for you here today. I'm going to be continuing on with the vaccines that I actually am pretty excited about, but I don't feel like I can do that out here in public at this point in time. So thank you so much. Please support us. If you like the video, hit like. If you want to subscribe to this channel, well, thank you. We've picked up thousands of subscribers over this past couple of weeks, and it's been just gratifying to be back, getting some traction here again on YouTube. That's fun. Remember, it doesn't have to be this way, so if you like this video, you like this kind of content, share it with 5 people. By the way, if you want to follow part 2 of this, just click right here, and this link will take you right over to our website where you can follow part 2 of this, where I continue on and talk more about the things you heard about here. And by the way, if you want, on Thursday night, instead of having this regular video feature, I'm going to be on Tim Pool on his live cast, going to be interacting with him in a live way. We'll give you a link for that later so you can follow it there, or just go to Timcast in real life and watch me there on Thursday night. Going to be pretty exciting talking with him, because we're going to be talking about these very same issues, censorship and the suppression of treatments and things like that. So be a lot of fun. Hey, we'll see you there. Otherwise, click the link, come on by. We'll see you at Peak Prosperity.